What happens when a black woman walks into a room full of power and they assume she doesn't belong? New York City. A city where ambition slices through the air like cold steel, where skyscrapers house titans and boardrooms decide the future with a flick of a pen, on the 40th floor of the sleek obsidian tower that housed Stormwell Technologies, the most powerful AI firm on the East Coast. A group of executives settled into leather chairs, ready to destroy a woman before even hearing her speak. The elevator chimed. Heads turned. She stepped out. No designer bag, no heels, no sleek hair or expensive jewelry. Just a black woman in her early 30s, hair pulled back in a neat low bun, wearing a fitted but clearly well-worn navy blazer over a white blouse flats that had seen better days, and a plain black folder pressed to her chest. The air shifted. You could feel it, not in awe, in dismissal. Diane Sloan, the HR director, leaned toward the man beside her and muttered just loud enough to be heard. Looks like she wandered in from the subway. Did someone leave the service entrance open? Gregory Beck, COO, smirked. We're hiring executives, not lost interns. And then came the laughter, quick, sharp, and biting. Amara Jackson said nothing. She simply walked toward the long glass-walled conference room where her final interview was being held. Her eyes, deep brown unshaken, took in every corner of the room, the mahogany table, the floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a hazy city skyline, and the 5 people already gathered, clean-cut, expensive, smug. She wasn't surprised. She'd been here before. Not in this exact boardroom, but in rooms like this, where her skin was a statement, where her quiet confidence was mistaken for inexperience, where people whispered diversity hire before they even saw her resume. Diane cleared her throat. Mrs. Jackson, she said, voice honeyed with artificial politeness. I'm afraid we already have a strong internal candidate for this leadership role. You're welcome to sit, but this might be a formality. Amara nodded gently and took her seat at the end of the table. That's fine, I came prepared anyway. Greg slid a copy of her resume toward him, barely glancing. Liberal arts, background, sociology. You've never managed a team this size. You're applying for a director of systems integration role. Why? Amara leaned forward, voice steady, soft but clear. Because I've already done the job. The last product launch you had, your latency dropped by 27% because of a predictive load balancing model I helped design at my previous firm. I didn't have the title, but I had the responsibility. Tyler Price, the youngest at the table, early 30s trust fund tech kid turned VP, let out a soft scoff. Yes, the invisible architect. We get that a lot. Laura Nguyen, head of data analytics, looked her up and down. This company moves fast. Our people wear tailored suits and sprint. No offense, but your presentation doesn't exactly say executive material. Amara smiled politely. I assumed my ideas would speak louder than my shoes. Silence. Then Diane chuckled. Bold, I'll give you that. Greg sighed and tapped his pen. Let's cut to the chase. You don't come from a top-tier school. You don't have Fortune 500 logos on your resume. You've never run a team with more than 10 engineers. So why should we take a risk on you when we have people like Tyler here? Tyler leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers behind his head. Yeah, why? Amara paused, then said with calm precision. Because I don't just optimize systems, I design them. Because I understand the ethics behind the code that makes this company billions. And because someone in this room should care more about impact than polish. And for a moment, just a moment, no one knew what to say. Then Greg flipped her resume upside down and said, We'll take it from here, Ms. Jackson. Thanks for your time. Stormwell Technologies was supposed to be a place of vision, innovation, progress. But in that conference room, it felt like the 1950s dressed in Prada. After Amara Jackson calmly laid out her experience, her credentials, and her reason for sitting in that room expecting a fair shot, the response wasn't silence. It was a slow-burning humiliation. Greg leaned back in his chair and smirked. AI ethics. That's cute. Is that like writing poetry for robots? Tyler chuckled, nudging Diane. She probably thinks ChatGPT is going to make her a VP. Diane crossed her legs, her red Louboutins glinting under the light. Look, Amara, we appreciate your confidence, but you're in over your head. This isn't an entry-level mentorship program. This is where sharks swim. Amara didn't blink. You don't have to believe in me. Just let me show you. The audacity in her voice, measured not loud, unsettled them, like someone refusing to kneel. Greg stood up, picked up a heavy binder from the credenza behind him, and tossed it on the table with a thud that made the glass ripple. Fine, let's play. You want to show us solve this. The binder slammed open to reveal a technical case study, 10 pages of complex system architecture, algorithm troubleshooting, and back-end load simulations. Greg's eyes gleamed. You have 15 minutes. No laptop, pen, and paper only. Solve what you can. Tyler added with a snicker. If she can spell API correctly, I'll give her a gold star. Amara looked down at the pages. Then she looked up at every one of their eyes. She didn't hesitate. She rolled up her sleeves, took the pen offered to her, and began writing in swift, confident strokes. Her handwriting precise. Her logic sharp. Her mind calm. You could hear the tick of the wall clock. You could feel the discomfort as their jeers slowed. Diane began to shift in her seat. Laura leaned forward. Greg's smirk was slowly curdling. 10 minutes in, Amara was done. She closed the binder, slid the pages forward. Would you like me to walk you through it? She asked, voice as even as her breath. Greg didn't even read it. He picked up the stack of paper, held it in his hand, and tore it in half. Deliberately, slowly, the sound of ripping echoed like a punch in the gut. He dropped it into the trash can beside him. Not interested in bedtime stories. This isn't a coding camp. Diane burst out laughing. She really thought she was in the big leagues. Laura tossed a pen across the table at Amara where it bounced off her folder. Here, use that to write your resignation before you even get hired. Tyler reached for a bottle of water from the table and without a word uncapped it and poured it slowly over Amara's head. Cold, shocking. The water soaked her blouse, drenched her blazer, dripped from her curls. He grinned. That's the only splash you'll be making in this company. Amara froze. Her eyes didn't tear. Her hands didn't shake. She stood drenched and silent, her strength more blinding than rage. Greg waved dismissively. Security. Diane added, escort her out. She's making a mess on the carpet. Moments later, 2 uniformed guards appeared. Big men. One grabbed her folder, the other tugged her arm. She didn't resist. Not one word left her lips. But before they reached the door, Tyler grabbed a half-full coffee cup and flung it at her back. Here's your send-off, sweetheart. Welcome to Stormwell. The stain bloomed across her soaked white blouse like a target. But Amara didn't flinch. She didn't look back. She didn't let them see her break. Because she wasn't broken. Not even close. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime, but in Amara's mind, it sounded like a verdict slamming shut. Her clothes clung to her skin. The chill from the water and coffee was nothing compared to the sting in her chest. But she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and dialed. 1 ring. 2. It's me, she said. There was a pause on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. How bad? Amara's voice was calm. They tore up my work, dumped coffee on me, laughed, called security. I was escorted out. Silence. And then a low voice that cut like steel. I'm on my way. She hung up and stood in the courtyard of Stormwell Technologies, a skyscraper of glass and hubris that gleamed like a sword in the sunlight, a symbol of power, to most a fortress, to outsiders. She was no outsider, not really, but they hadn't recognized her, and they wouldn't forget her again. Elsewhere on the 42nd floor. Back in the conference room, the laughter had already died down. Diane checked her emails. Tyler scrolled Instagram. Laura was already mocking the next candidate on the docket. Greg reached for another coffee. None of them knew that the storm they'd just kicked out the door had the keys to the building, because behind the closed doors of Stormwell's highest level floor, 50 sat Elijah Storm, founder, visionary. A man who hadn't been seen in public for nearly a year. Rumors said he was taking time to strategize the next era of tech. Others said he'd stepped away to manage investments. They were all wrong. He was watching every move, every hire, every test. He'd tasked the board with selecting new leadership, a blind evaluation. He'd said, judge only on talent, not status. And they failed. Horribly. Meanwhile, in a black car gliding across downtown Manhattan, Elijah Storm sat in the back seat, silent, his steel blue eyes locked on the building rising in the distance. He wasn't wearing a tie. He didn't need one. His presence was his armor. Next to him sat Amara, wrapped in a clean coat, her hair tied back neatly once more. The water and coffee stains were gone. But the memory wasn't. He glanced at her. You sure you want to go back in with me? Amara nodded. I'm not going back for revenge. I'm going back for every girl who's been humiliated like that, for every black woman who got told she didn't belong. He nodded slowly. Then let's end this, right? Back at Stormwell HQ, a security alert pinged across the executive floor. Priority override CEO arrival. People scrambled. Assistants spilled coffee. Executives straightened ties. The boardroom filled with whispers. When the elevator doors opened, the floor fell silent. Elijah Storm walked out. Every head turned, and behind him, Amara. Dry, calm head high. Laura's pen dropped. Diane's face went white. Tyler's jaw clenched. Greg actually whispered, "No." Elijah entered the room without a word and stood at the head of the conference table. Every executive stood, except him. He didn't sit. He didn't need to. He looked at them all and then he turned to Amara. "Would you like to speak first?" She nodded once, walked slowly to the head of the table. She was calm, composed. And when she opened her mouth, she didn't scream. She told the truth. "I walked into this room yesterday to be evaluated. Instead, I was degraded, mocked, soaked, called garbage, and told to try retail, but not once. Did anyone ask about my work?" She looked at Laura. "You said I didn't belong then at Tyler. You poured water on me because you didn't like my confidence. To Greg, you tore apart a technical solution you didn't even read. To Diane, and you defaced my resume on camera." Amara turned back to Elijah. "I didn't walk away broken, but I walked away with a mission. This isn't about me. This is about every woman of color who's been treated like furniture, looked at, judged, dismissed, and discarded." The room was silent. Elijah finally spoke. His voice was a hammer wrapped in silk. "They didn't know who she was, but I did. Amara Jackson is not only my partner in life, but my co-architect in building Stormwell." Gasps. He looked at the screen. "Roll the footage." And then everything played. The jokes, the insults, the spilled water, the coffee cup, Diane's voice calling her a stain, Greg's hand tearing her work, Laura's cruel laughter. The board watched white-knuckled, and when the footage ended, Elijah spoke again. "You had one job to find leaders. Instead, you revealed yourselves." He turned to Amara and said softly, "Would you like to choose their replacements?" She smiled. "Not yet. First, I want them to understand what respect looks like." For a moment, the room was frozen, like time itself was holding its breath. The faces around the table, once smug and sure, now looked like portraits of dread. Diane's manicured nails tapped nervously against the wood. Greg's Rolex seemed to tick louder with every second. Tyler's smirk had long since vanished, replaced by the uneasy twitch of a man realizing his last joke may be his last breath of comfort. Laura was already adjusting her glasses, like she could blink her way out of reality. Mark looked ready to vomit. But Elijah Storm was far from done. "Let's talk about qualifications." He said, his tone surgically calm. "You mocked a woman who built our AI security protocol from scratch. You insulted the person whose code protects your data, your money, your jobs." He turned to Amara. "Please show them your work." Amara didn't speak. She pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket and walked to the wall screen. One click, and the monitor came to life. A full system diagram of Stormwell's backend. Next slide, deep learning frameworks. Next, a modular security framework annotated with timestamps and source author tags, all bearing her initials. "This," she said quietly, "is what you called trash. This is what you drenched in water, covered in coffee, and stomped under your heels, the foundation of your company." Dead silence, until Elijah added, "She didn't just build the backbone of Stormwell's security, she built the foundation of our success." He paused and looked at them all. "You didn't just humiliate my wife, you humiliated Stormwell's future." Across the room, the air shifted. Shareholders on the video conference previously muted began to unmute one by one. "Mr. Storm," one elderly board member from London said, "we demand full investigation and accountability. These people," he gestured toward the panel, "have just cost us our reputation." Another voice joined from Tokyo. "Firing is not enough, blacklisting full HR documentation, industry-wide alerts." A third shareholder from San Francisco. "We've been wondering why talent retention's dropped. Now we know." The judgment was swift, and the accused were unraveling. Diane tried to interrupt. "This is a misunderstanding. We didn't know." Elijah raised a hand, and she went quiet instantly. You didn't care to know. He turned to security. Remove them one by one. Start with her. He pointed at Diane. The guard stepped forward. Diane stood, her voice cracking. You're making a mistake. I've been with this company. And now you're leaving it, Elijah replied. As she was led away, her red blazer brushing the edge of the chair, Greg rose from his seat in a panic. Look, I was just going along with the tone. It was all just banter. I didn't mean it. Amara's eyes never left him. You dumped a trash can over me. You called my mind worthless. Greg's laugh was hollow. It was just pressure. The culture here. You were the culture, Elijah snapped. And now that culture's over. Next was Laura. She didn't even try to defend herself. Just stood, stiff eyes wide like a puppet cut from its strings. As she passed Amara, she whispered, I'm sorry. No, you're scared, Amara said. There's a difference. Tyler tried charm. Look, I was out of line, but we're cool, right? I mean, it was just an act. You called me garbage girl, Amara replied, her voice like a blade. You dumped water on me and laughed. He paled. I was just trying to be funny. She stepped forward just inches from him. You're not funny. You're cruel. And now the only place you'll be performing is in front of your own lawyer. As the last of them were escorted out, Elijah turned to the board and announced, We will be releasing a public statement immediately. Stormwell will no longer tolerate bullying, racism, elitism, or cruelty in any form. Then he paused and looked to Amara. And as for you, I want you to lead this initiative, not just internally industry-wide. We're launching a new division, Storm Ethics. The board erupted in agreement. One investor chimed in. Let her rebuild what they tried to break. Amara stood still for a moment, then nodded. I'll do it. Not for me, but for every black girl who ever got laughed at, for dreaming too big, for every woman told she didn't belong in the room she built. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of transformation. Stormwell's public apology, crafted in Amara's own words, made headlines across every major news outlet. We failed to recognize the brilliance standing before us, but we will never make that mistake again. Her words echoed far beyond tech circles. They reached college campuses, mentorship forums, black-led nonprofits, and every ambitious young girl who had ever second-guessed her worth because of the way she looked or where she came from. They reached the ones who had been called unqualified, too loud, too quiet, too emotional, or simply too black. The ones told they didn't belong in boardrooms built on their backs. But Amara was no longer interested in boardrooms. She was interested in building bridges. She stepped into her new role as the head of Storm Ethics with the quiet command of a woman who had nothing to prove, yet everything to change. Her first move was bold. She proposed a mentorship pipeline specifically for young black women and women of color in STEM, complete with scholarships, project partnerships, and direct access to Stormwell's leadership. I want them to walk into a room and know they own it, she said at a press conference. Not because they're loud, but because they belong. The initiative was titled the Amara Project, not by her suggestion, but unanimously voted by the board. And when the first cohort of young interns walked through Stormwell's revolving glass doors, they didn't meet HR directors with thin smiles and measuring eyes. They met Amara herself, hair in a crown of curls, black blazer, wide-legged trousers, chin held high. She smiled and said, Welcome, this company doesn't exist without women like you. The irony, her story. The one they tried to bury had become Stormwell's most powerful brand asset. It was no longer just about tech. It was about transformation. Meanwhile, the former panelists, Diane, Greg, Laura Tyler, and Mark, faded into infamy. Diane tried launching a professional coaching firm. It was shut down within months. Greg attempted to join a competing firm. Investors walked out when his name appeared in the hiring draft. Tyler's family severed ties, citing reputational liability. Laura left LinkedIn altogether after her inbox flooded with calls for accountability. And Mark, he was seen at a downtown job fair handing out resumes no one wanted. But Amara, she kept moving forward. She keynoted at the Global Women in Tech Summit with a speech that brought the room to its feet. She was named one of Time magazine's 25 most influential women in business. She was offered book deals, documentaries, collaborations. Yet she stayed true. She still walked to work in her favorite pair of worn flats. She still carried a simple folder, though. Now it held speaking notes and systems diagrams signed with her initials. She still kept her office door open, a jar of lemon drops on her desk, and an invitation pinned to the wall that read, "To every girl who's ever been told she's not the type, you are the blueprint." Epilogue. Justice isn't loud, it's consistent. Months later, a cold drizzle blanketed downtown San Francisco. A man in a faded suit coat sat huddled beneath the awning of a job center. His sign was cardboard. His shoes were cracked. His name was Greg Palmer. People passed without looking, except one. Amara, in a black trench coat, paused. She looked down. He looked up. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. Then he did. He started. She held up her hand. "You said I didn't belong. Now you know why I did." She pulled a quarter from her coat pocket and placed it in his hand. It was polished heavy and engraved on the side, "Justice isn't revenge, it's remembrance." Then she turned her heels, clicking as she walked away. Her posture, steady, her legacy, unshakable. Because Amara didn't rise in spite of what they did. She rose because of it. And because women like her always do.